Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Mark Martin. Today, the deadly threats to northern Israel from terrorist groups backed by Iran. We'll hear what people in that region say about the dangers they face. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in China, with relations between the two countries at a new low, and after a series of aggressive military moves by China against the U.S. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis talking about his faith and key issues on the campaign trail in an exclusive interview with CBN News. And today marks Juneteenth, the newest federal holiday marking the end of slavery in the United States. We'll hear why all Americans should celebrate. Those stories and more today on CBN NewsWatch. We begin with the ongoing terrorist threat to Israel. The northern part of the country is beautiful and an inviting place to live, but just across the border with Lebanon are terrorist groups backed by Iran. CBN News Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl talked to people there about the threats they face.
On Passover this year, Hamas launched 36 rockets toward northern Israeli communities, while the Iron Dome defense system intercepted 25. One landed here.
It was just an empty warehouse. Nothing happened, but you can see that across the street, it's a kindergarten, and it's a home over here. I think this explains us in the best way the contradiction between the beautiful day, normal life, happy children, and what could have happened if it was not a holiday.
Sarit Zahavi lives near the border and began the Alma Research Center, an organization focused on security challenges in the region.
I believe that Hezbollah assisted, that Hezbollah helped Hamas to find the locations, to find where exactly to launch from.
Iran backs Hezbollah, a powerful longtime enemy in Lebanon. The terror group has tens of thousands of rockets aimed across the border in order to carry out the regime's main goals, including wiping Israel off the map.
This is the Israel-Lebanon border. The tower behind me belongs to Hezbollah, and they're also building the road, which shows you just how close the threat is.
Zahavi recently captured these photos of Hezbollah surveilling the area even closer to the border. Some 268,000 Israelis live within 12 miles of the 49-mile-long Israel-Lebanon border. About 250 of them are in Zarit, a community founded in 1967 that lies about 650 feet from Hezbollah lookouts.
In general, it's good for us. Quiet, relaxed, good atmosphere. Everything is green. Everything is beautiful.
Born and raised here, 54-year-old Yossi Baranes heads up security and says his biggest worry is the thought of Hezbollah potentially reaching into the community.
If Hezbollah would infiltrate, then I would have to deal with it. Against this, we're on high alert all the time.
I really was born here. I feel that this is my only home. First of all, it's Zionism, because if we won't be here, there will be another people which will come and settle here. This is the most beautiful place in the earth. The political issues and the security issues are very disturbing, but we're trying to live our lives good and safe.
52-year-old Rinat Carmel says Hezbollah's advanced weaponry frightens her the most.
By bombing us with new rockets and things we cannot avoid or get sheltered from them or be safe, I think the next war will be more sophisticated, and we don't know enough. We know a lot about their programs, about this settlement. They want to occupy us and then to kill our people or to take some refugees and then to negotiate.
Part of the border is walled, and the IDF is building more each day.
The decision to build the wall was taken a few years ago, but in the past year, the project was accelerated.
Several years ago, the IDF uncovered a massive Hezbollah terror tunnel at Zarit, intended to bring death and destruction to the people along the border. And recently, at the edge of Zarit by the community's mushroom factory, Hezbollah carried out a drill just meters away, simulating an attack, including kidnapping Israelis.
When these black towers first appeared, the IDF published that these black towers belonged to the Lebanese army. But actually, every day, maybe now, including yesterday, We see Hezbollah military operatives on top of these black towers.
All of this happens under the watchful eye of the United Nations, which creates another dilemma for Israel.
It's the same dilemma with the human shield issue. What do you do if there is a launcher next to this UN position over there, and it is launching to Yossi's house in Zarit? And if you destroy the launcher, you may destroy the UN position as well. If you don't destroy the launcher, it's Yossi's family.
Even though Hezbollah and Iran are not interested in a Palestinian state like others, a nearby water tower is meant to look like the Dome of the Rock on Jerusalem's Temple Mount.
There is a reason why it's decorated like the Dome of the Rock. This is exactly building the narrative that where we are standing, in their point of view, this is Palestine. In their point of view, the whole area from the Galilee to Eilat, from the river to the sea, it's Palestine.
So for now, Israelis living on the border continue their daily lives under this growing threat from Iran and Hezbollah, knowing at any moment they could be attacked by a brutal enemy that desires their destruction. Julie Stahl, CBN News, the Israel-Lebanon border.
Also in Israel, a major development in the ongoing political battle over reforming the country's judicial system. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announcing at Sunday's cabinet meeting that the coalition government will move ahead with the reform legislation, saying the recent, quote, so-called negotiations were actually just a waste of time. Leaders of the groups protesting against reform warned they will ratchet up their street activities again. Critics say the plan would upend Israel's delicate system of checks and balances and push the country toward authoritarianism. The government says the plan is necessary to restore power to elected officials and weaken what it calls an interventionist Supreme Court. We're going to have a deeper look at this story on tomorrow's NewsWatch. In China, Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Chinese President Xi today, wrapping up a two-day visit to Beijing aimed at easing tensions. Critics say the visit is coming after a series of provocative Chinese actions that have made the U.S. look weak. Dale Hurd has the story.
Chinese President Xi said the two sides reached agreements on some specific issues without providing any details. He added he hoped the Blinken visit would make more positive contributions to stabilizing China-U.S. relations. The meeting comes after a series of aggressive military moves by China against the United States, with relations between the two countries, by some estimates, reaching a new low.
We're trying to make sure, through better communications, that the competition doesn't veer into conflict.
Earlier this month, the Chinese warship came within 150 yards of a U.S. destroyer in international waters in the Taiwan Strait. And just before that, a Chinese jet flew into the path of a U.S. military plane, a maneuver the Pentagon called dangerous and unnecessary. This in response to U.S. naval power in the region, a signal it's ready to counter Chinese aggression and stand up for Taiwan. China has warned the U.S. to stop interfering in China's internal affairs and said the U.S. should not fantasize about dealing with China based on its position of power.
I think China's sending a message, hey, we're in charge now, you're finished, because they want to use that kind of perception of China's strength relative to the United States to bludgeon countries in the region and say, hey, time to bandwagon with us. This is our era.
China has also encroached in our neighborhood. Chinese data-gathering balloons have drifted through U.S. airspace, one of which was publicly shot down, but only after it traveled cross-country gathering information. Now China plans to install a spy station in Cuba, 90 miles off the Florida coast, that will be able to monitor U.S. military bases across the southern U.S.
China has been pushing poverty throughout the hemisphere, and you now have socialist governments, not just in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. You have left governments in Brazil, you have left governments in Chile, in Argentina, and in Colombia. So the tide is turning against us.
This weekend, Joe Biden essentially defended the Chinese government, saying it had legitimate difficulties with the United States, and calling the Chinese balloon incident more embarrassing than it was intentional. Biden said he hopes to meet President Xi in the next several months. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
In other news, we want to remind you that you can watch the Celebration of Life service for Pat Robertson on the CBN News YouTube channel. That's today at 11:30 a.m. Coming up, our CBN News exclusive interview with a key Republican presidential contender, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. We'll hear what he says about his faith, the role it's played in his life, including during tough times for his family, and why America needs more God in our society when we come back. In an exclusive interview with CBN News, Republican presidential candidate Ron DeSantis talks about his personal faith. Florida's governor also shares why he believes evangelical voters should choose him as the party's nominee in 2024. CBN's chief political analyst, David Brody, brings us that interview from the governor's residence in Tallahassee.
Hello, Governor. How you doing? Hey, welcome to Tallahassee. Thank you. Conservatives see Ron DeSantis as a no-nonsense crusader fighting the liberal agenda as Florida governor.
I don't think there's any elected official in the country who's not only stood up for the values that we all share, but has actually beat the left back on these things.
And in our interview, we explored new territory, a more personal look at the man who wants to be the next president. Who are you at your core? What is your DNA all about?
So, I'm a working class kid. I mean, my mom's from Youngstown, Ohio. My dad's from Western Pennsylvania. I think that they were very, very clear about what I needed to be doing for my obligations. You know, do well in school, make sure you're in church every Sunday, make sure you're working around the house. You're not going to get anything handed to you.
A philosophy reinforced at a strict Catholic grade school he attended. Did you like it? Did you, oh my gosh, I couldn't stand it? Or what was the experience like?
Well, I think by and large I liked it, but again, I think the things that I didn't like about it were because they were doing the right thing by making sure that we were disciplined and making sure that we were, you would pray every day. Some of the nuns were very strict about what your obligations were. And again, as a young kid, maybe not the most fun at the time, but I think was the right approach.
That discipline and hard work led to success as a baseball player in Little League, high school, and at Yale. Other shining accomplishments followed: Harvard Law, a Navy lawyer, serving in Iraq, becoming a U.S. congressman, and now governor.
I always believed that it doesn't matter where you start. If you put that nose to the grindstone and work hard, God has a plan for you and you can do well in this country.
DeSantis credits his Catholic faith for keeping him grounded in truth. While he doesn't publicly tout his faith, he and his wife Casey attend church regularly and make it a family priority.
Our household is a Christ-centered household, and we're raising our kids, with those values. We think that that's very important. It's great for us when our kids are coming back from preschool or kindergarten talking about David and Goliath and talking about some of these, and we're like, thank you. So we're very, very appreciative of being able to do that. My son, he was 4 for Christmas this year. He wanted a sling to be like David slaying Goliath. And so that really, I think, warms our hearts when we see that.
Like King David, DeSantis had to lean on his faith and prayer during his wife's 2021 breast cancer diagnosis. After undergoing treatment, she's now cancer-free.
There was a definite increase in her spirits once we went public and people started praying for us. And yes, absolutely.
The governor has faced tragedy as well. In 2015, his sister Christina died suddenly at just 30 years old.
She had a pulmonary embolism, so it's difficult just because you're just thinking why would that have to happen? And not that you want any illness, but it's sometimes people are going through it. This was something 5 days before it happened was not even on our radar.
Times like that can challenge anyone. For DeSantis, there's a scripture verse he keeps central to his life.
I would point out, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. That's ultimately what the faith centers around. Yes, there's a lot of traditions, and I think a lot of those are nice, but at the end of the day, it's kind of, where is your heart with respect to God, and what is that relationship?
DeSantis hopes to build a strong relationship with voters, especially evangelicals in the early primary states of Iowa and South Carolina. Wins there could help put him on the path to the GOP nomination. He has plenty of policy wins on his resume, including a pro-life Florida heartbeat law. He's quick to point out how that distinguishes him from the former president, President Trump.
While I appreciate what the former president has done in a variety of realms, he opposes that bill. He said it was, quote, harsh to protect an unborn child when there's a detectable heartbeat. I think that's humane to do.
Do you feel the former president's going soft then on abortion a little bit, especially in this area that you mentioned?
Well, I think so. I mean, I was really surprised because he's a Florida resident, and I thought he would compliment the fact, you know, that we were able to do the heartbeat bill, which pro-lifers have wanted for a long time. He never complimented, never said anything about it. Then he was asked about it, and he said it was, quote, harsh.
But DeSantis' message to evangelicals on how to turn this country around is much bigger than one issue.
It's got to be a spiritual, and I think it's got to be a strong faith that is really going to get us through very turbulent times.
So we need more God in society today.
No, absolutely. I mean, look, at the end of the day, there's certain problems, economic problems, there's problems at the border, there's all very important, but you know, why are we here? Why are we free people? We're free because God has endowed us with inalienable rights. That's why America was founded. Our Constitution was created not to give us rights, but to protect the rights that God has already bestowed upon us.
While DeSantis wants to spread that message today, looking back in history, he told us of another message that would have been great to witness.
Could I have been there with Jesus' disciples? I mean, you know, these are people who, you know, Peter's just fishing one day, and all of a sudden, you know, this guy comes up to him, catches all the fish and says, you know, you're going to be fisher. I want you to be a fisher of men. Come with me. And so these guys all went out and they dedicated their life to spreading the gospel. I look back at that and would love to have been able to be there with them.
Instead, he'll be spreading a 2024 campaign message of conservatism cloaked in faith.
Thank you.
David Brody, CBN News, at the Florida governor's residence in Tallahassee.
Still ahead, today marks the celebration of the newest federal holiday, Juneteenth, when the last slave community in the U.S. got the word that they had been set free. We'll hear why it's something all Americans should celebrate right after this. Today is Juneteenth, a federal holiday commemorating the emancipation of slaves in Texas on this day in 1865. Dr. David Anderson, president of Gracism Global, explains the significance of the holiday and why Juneteenth should be celebrated by all Americans.
Juneteenth, I'm glad it's a national holiday. It's taken a long time for that to happen. And of course, on the heels of George Floyd being murdered, I think the consciousness of America was finally pricked to say, Black history really matters. And this is a significant part of Black history because it is the last time enslaved Africans could legally be enslaved. So you can only imagine how exciting it would be for anybody who has been in prison or enslaved or had a disease or whatever it may be. In their very last day, they walk away free.
So is Juneteenth the day to remember or lament?
Well, probably a little bit of both, because whenever you look at history, you have to look at not only the sad parts of it, but also the joy that comes from it. And with our culture, there's a lot of sadness because, you know, Africans were kidnapped and enslaved for hundreds of years. And then they had to fight for, you know, civil rights and all of this for people who look like me, great-grandparents and ancestors. So, yeah, there's a sadness to it. But there's also something powerful about the ability to survive. And the Black family being able to even survive in any measure is an absolute miracle today based on the decimation of the Black family that took place from the transatlantic slave trade, and then the heinous slavery, chattel slavery, on the soil of our own country, where Africans built the country for no fee, for no wage, and oftentimes under very horrendous conditions. So is there something to lament? No doubt about it. But is there something to celebrate? Yes. Freedom, survival, stick-to-itiveness, unity amidst great horror, and I think that's what our country is all about, reminding people that freedom may not be free, but it really does matter when you experience it.
And David, 158 years later, race and racism is still an issue here in the United States. Why is that?
Sadly, the institutions that have been set forth from the very beginning of the country on the foundational pillars of racism still stand to this day, and practices that many African Americans experience. And so racism is to speak, act, or think negatively about someone else solely based on their color, class, or culture. And so that's a bad thing. And when institutions surround that kind of idea, it can be really, really bad for people. And it had been for so many years. But legally, we've got it right. Now, morally and economically, we have to get it right. And that's what I'm hoping takes place through God's word, through the unity that comes through the brotherhood and the sisterhood of the family of believers, and then also through restitution in a way that we can help lift up the Black family.
Okay, some good thoughts. Dr. David Anderson of Gracism Global, always a pleasure to talk with you. God bless you.
Bless you back. Thank you.
Coming up, a high school valedictorian talks to CBN about her graduation speech, where she talked about faith in Jesus. That speech has spread rapidly online. We're going to hear the story behind it and what the reaction was, what the reaction has been from her fellow students when we come back. A bold high school valedictorian who recently delivered a memorable speech about faith in Jesus and biblical truth is surprised her powerful address spread so rapidly online. Lydia Owens, who graduated from Woodmont High School in Piedmont, South Carolina, spoke to CBN's Faith Wire along with her father, Brian, a Baptist pastor. She discussed what led to talk about the Lord, the loss of her mother, and what her fellow students had to say after her speech.
I had so many people reach out to me that were my peers who went to my school who I may never have talked to, and just they reached out to me and they told me how much they needed that reminder, that especially as we all transition into college, like remembering that our identity doesn't come from what we do and what we accomplish, it comes from Jesus and Jesus alone. I just got a lot of people telling me how thankful they were that I was bold enough to speak about that and to share that. And even a lot of people told me that they've lost a parent or they've lost someone in their life and how that was so difficult for them. And so sharing my story was an encouragement to them. And ultimately, it's opened up so many opportunities for me to tell people to continue to be bold and to use any platform they can to share the gospel.
And that's going to do it for today's News Watch. We'll see you next time.